This is to start people off. This is to get people interested. There are really simple things that we're going to list, which you can very easily go out, you can forage, you know that you're safe. Other things, if you become more interested, you need to go out and you need to find people who can actually train you up.
Yeah.
I think of nature as being the only consistent heritage that we have, and that connects us with the wildlife around us, but it also connects us to the people around us in a different way. This film is about looking at foraging, not necessarily as a practical way of life for everybody to try and find the bulk of their food, but it's certainly a way of people connecting with nature. So even just doing a tiny amount of foraging, I think, is very healthy for human beings. It puts them back in touch directly with where they get food from. I think in terms of our heritage, this is something that we're losing. There's a comment you made when we were just walking through the brook, is that there would have even been children happily foraging along somewhere like the brook and knowing exactly what to pick and what not to pick, because it was common knowledge. And it's not common knowledge anymore.
It's really good for a kid's self-esteem as well, you know, to be able to engage positively with your environment and feed yourself and look after yourself and those things and learning those skills. Massively important for a child's confidence, you know.
But again, I mean, this should be a family thing, and it's interesting that we always talk about engaging children, but that's very often because children are the ones who are most prepared to try something new.
Blackberries here, I don't know what to tell you about blackberries. They're absolutely everywhere. They're great. They're so prolific and abundant that people don't even think of them as foraging. But of course, this would be the main experience British people today have of foraging in this country, will be picking blackberries with their kids and filling a bag of them, and maybe even making a crumble when they get home with apple and blackberry. I often get inquiries, is it illegal to forage stuff? Well, people never think it's illegal to forage blackberries. They know that that's okay. They're just picking a fruit and eating it, and more or less everything that you can forage is the same. The only legal issues come up if you're uprooting something without the permission of the landowner.
Do you go on health walks?
Yes.
Is that what you're doing now?
Yes.
So can you tell us about your health walk?
Okay, it's run by My Time Active on behalf of the NHS, is my understanding, and we do one along the Thimble brook every third Wednesday morning. And as the seasons go on, so we take note of the flowers, and the flowers that, because I'm a friend of the Thimble brook, so I've helped plant 200 odd wildflowers, 40 trees along here. And
do you like blackberries?
Do you like blackberries?
Are you looking for blackberries?
There's a gorgeous elderflower bush up there, absolutely crammed. On the corner there is a tree, and if you look very carefully, if they haven't all fallen, there's tiny little pears about that big, and they're sweet, and you can eat them. Because we ate them on our last health walk, didn't we?
Yes. Excellent. So horseradish is quite common in the UK. It looks like a giant dock leaf, but it's more green than a dock leaf. It's quite easy to distinguish. The roots are quite bendy and twisty, as opposed to the sort you would cultivate, where you generally have a thick, straight root. So horseradish that you find wild is a bit harder to process. However, it's absolutely lovely. It's really full of flavour. So nettle's a brilliant plant. It's got lots of uses, hasn't it? The main one, I suppose, is that you eat it. So you have to eat it before it flowers. That's kind of important. The leaves can be quite tough. You can put the tough leaves in a soup and use it for nettle soup, or maybe even nettle tea, but really you want the tender leaves that are right on the tip of the nettle plant, or the very young leaves just as the nettle starts to come out of the ground. I fry mine with Worcester sauce and chorizo, which is really, I find, quite nice, because the leaves are quite a solid thing. They're quite chewy. As soon as you wilt nettle, cook it or anything, the sting completely disappears. But yeah, it's a common objection that's raised. It's a fantastic plant. It's full of vitamins and minerals. It's got 25% dried weight of protein, so it's a plant you can really use as a substantial addition to your diet. And in Scandinavia, they have a festival, or they traditionally had a festival. When the nettle emerges, that indicates to them that, you know, things are growing again, there's fresh greens available again. So earlier in the year, I would have been looking at elderflower, and I did do, and I went and picked a load and used the flower heads. There's a lovely big white flower with these really prominent stamens, and I would have used them for elderflower wine. It's a lovely, sweet, fragrant floral thing. Really, really lovely. And you can make elderflower champagne as well, which is a really traditional British, very, very mild alcoholic drink. This time of year, the elderberries, they're not my favourite elderberries. They've got quite an earthy taste, but they're full of vitamins and sugars. So this is hawthorn. It's a dry fruit. It's not the tastiest of fruit, but again, it's got lots of vitamins in it and so on. And it's available largely right through the winter, so it's an important food source. It's meant to be a medicine for blood pressure, and I was never sure whether this was the case. And they say that it's good for the blood, but you need to use it regularly for 3 months to gain any benefit. You can just eat it, just like that. It's got a big seed in the centre. And if it's not entirely ripe, it's actually quite unpleasant, but when it is ripe, it's kind of just innocuous. This is a Swedish white beam. 2 types of white beam in the country. One with serrated leaves like this, that's Sorbus intermedia, and then the other one doesn't have serrated leaves, that's Sorbus aurea. They're both functionally exactly the same for foraging, and this is the berry they produce. But it's actually not bad. If it was fully ripe, it wouldn't have that astringency. And these are very common street tree. They're everywhere. So in a normal year, I'll be able to pick these at this time of year, just walking down the street. But this year, it's been a really bad year for them. They're not quite ripe yet, and it's getting quite late for them now. Because normally they'd just be hanging off in bunches, just like you'd see on a road. But they're nice. You're just walking along, and I just saw this little flash of yellow. That's these lovely little plums. They look like they're in the Gage family. They are fantastically sweet, really juicy and nice. As good a plum as you're ever going to eat. Plums, people think you can tell the plums apart. It's often not true in practice. What happens is they breed with each other and they mingle a lot, and you end up with lots of different hybrids and varieties. So really the only way to know whether the plum's going to be a really good plum or just a good plum is to go and have a chomp and see how good they are. Now, this one's really great. We've struck gold here. And there is a poisonous plum. It's cherry laurel, but it has a massively distinctive, shiny, glossy, big evergreen leaf, which you just can't miss. So, in general, the plums are very safe trees to eat, and you really can't go wrong. The worst that'll happen is it's a bit bitter, and you'll spit it out.
And here we are, just by this really busy roundabout, surrounded by cars and all sorts of things, and the most delicious plum I've ever eaten, just here, sitting here hidden by the side of the roundabout.
It's amazing, isn't it? And it's the same everywhere. When you start looking, you will find them everywhere. Japanese knotweed was introduced into Victorian gardens. It's massively invasive. Even a tiny bit of this stuff will spread. It's a nationally recognised pest species. It's notifiable. That means that if you find it, you're meant to report it and you're meant to burn it. So it's a pretty serious pest species. However, quite tasty. The top 10 centimetres of the Japanese knotweed plant, where you can use more or less the same as you would use rhubarb. The easiest way to do it is in the spring when it comes out and it's just coming out of the ground. That's the easiest time. It gets about that big, chop it off, use it as a rhubarb replacement. It's pretty nice and it's massively abundant. I mean, there's no way around it. There's a lot of the stuff, and that allows you to fight the pest by eating it to death, which is brilliant. Dandelions are entirely edible from one end to the other. So the root is a fantastic coffee substitute. It's the only coffee substitute I know of that actually has quite a high level of caffeic acid. So it does in fact taste like coffee. It doesn't have caffeine in it, but it does have this caffeic acid, which is the same stuff you'll find in coffee beans. The leaves themselves, which are quite good for you, a diuretic, are perfectly good as a salad leaf. They can be forced in the spring. The flowers I've seen fried in tempura batter, and you can also turn the flowers into wine.
So how do you force the dandelion?
Forcing a plant is exactly the same thing as you do for rhubarb, and you can do it for chicory and other things on the allotment, really, to make the leaves more succulent. Essentially, you cover the plant so the leaves grow in the dark, and they don't photosynthesize. They grow because their roots have the energy stored up. They're looking for light, but they're not finding any. When you take that pot off, or you can do the same thing with rocks and earth, you take it off and the leaves that you've got underneath are much more tender and succulent and less bitter than they would be if you just let it grow out in the open. And whilst the hungry period is unpleasant and it can be a bit hard, it makes you really appreciate the stuff in a way that you just can't get from Tesco or Sainsbury's. You can't, where you've got this all year round abundance of every single thing you could ever want. You can't enjoy the seasonal life in the same way, and it's a shame, because I think you miss out on the happiness that comes from having gone without a little bit. You know, just like when you have a fire after you've been cold, you know, and you sit by the fire and you get a cup of tea and you suddenly feel so happy. But you wouldn't have been that happy had you not been cold for 4 hours first.